Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Jyothi Bathina. I am the co-director for the Center of Reading and Writing at the CSU Chancellor's Office. And we are really excited today to have this group of panelists who are doing amazing work in their various regions. And we wanted to bring all of those diverse perspectives together and present to you some of the challenges, some of the issues, and some of the strategies that are being implemented successfully across the state. So thank you for joining us. I am going to introduce briefly each of the panelists. From Napa County, we have Lucy Edwards. We've got Danielle Ross from Madera Superintendent's Office. We've got Leslie Zoroya from Southern California, LA County Office. And we have Chris Eddings from Stanislaus. So I am going to step out of the way so that we can hear from these brilliant panelists, and then we'll go ahead and have a conversation. So we're going to start off with Danielle. Danielle, would you like to get started?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I am Danielle Ross from Madera County Superintendent of Schools, and today I will be discussing vital issues in literacy education, emerging needs post-pandemic, success strategies from Madera County, implementation, and also hope for the future. So let's start with vital issues with regard to literacy education. So some of the vital issues that were existing before the pandemic include the need for leaps. In many cases, we have classes where many or most students are reading below grade level. And so that is a large need. Those students need support. Many of those students have developed avoidance strategies, especially as they've gone along in their education and still have existing needs. So many times behavior issues, attendance issues might actually be stemming from challenges specifically in reading. Long story short, sometimes students feel more comfortable misbehaving than actually admitting that they have such a significant need. And so another really important issue is an assets-based approach. So not only do students have needs that need to be met, they also want to show what they are strong in, and they have hobbies that they're excited about. They have skills that they're excited about, and so it's important to let those come to the forefront as well. Second, students have a desire for culturally relevant texts. A lot of teachers became English teachers because they love the classics, but a lot of students just don't connect to those classics. They don't relate. And so it's important to bring in texts that students can relate to, the characters, the settings, the situations. And then another important issue is that students want to read more than just fiction. They're really interested in things like manga, poetry, and even nonfiction. A third vital issue in literacy education has to do with the multilingual spectrum. It's really important to note that no two English learners are the same. Many have very, very different knowledge with regard to their home language. Some can read and write in their home language, others cannot, and so their needs are very diverse. Those that have strong base skills in their home language, they can be supported to transfer much of that knowledge. And then finally, there's just such a strong need to integrate ELD into all content areas. And then a final vital issue in literacy education that has come to the forefront more just with regard to what's been going on in the news and just within society is the need and desire for classroom discussions. Students want to talk, they want to share their opinions, and those opinions aren't always the same. In fact, they usually aren't. And so it's really important that teachers are trained to facilitate classroom discussions. And that's a really challenging something to undertake. And so again, teachers need to be ready for high emotion and polarization when they're facilitating those classroom discussions. So next, we're going to really focus in on what's come out as a result of the pandemic. What are emerging post-pandemic needs? So I want to preface the first one saying that I don't have any direct evidence of this, any research, but um, I just have a belief that this is something that we need to be aware of. I believe that there are hidden learning gaps. And so an example I want to give is advanced phonemic awareness. This usually develops in grades 2 and 3. So what happens to our students that were in pandemic learning, distance learning during some of second grade or all of second grade, and then some of third grade or all of third grade? And so an example I want to give is I had a student that I was told read at the 9th grade level. This was a 4th grader. And on all of their assessments, they tested out of phonics. So when I gave this student a phonological awareness assessment, they actually did not do well in advanced phonemic awareness. But this wasn't picked up on any assessments. This was not something that I ever would have imagined was the case. And so I'm thinking to myself, if this is true for that student, what else don't we know about? What other hidden learning gaps are not going to be picked up in assessments or data? So we need to be aware of those possibilities. A second huge challenge is just the need for relevance. A lot of students became disengaged during the pandemic. They couldn't go to school and just kind of lost interest. And so it's really important and vital to incorporate project-based learning, problem-based learning, real world-based learning, so that not only can we re-engage students, but they can feel a sense of ownership over their own educational process and feel like they can make their society a better place. They have interests, they're just not always being addressed in school. And so any way that we can get their interests incorporated into their education is fantastic. And then finally, they like to show their learning in different ways and creative ways. They don't always want to just show their learning with a test or an essay. Sometimes they can show their learning in creative ways. A third post-pandemic need, the real need is SEL. We all have seen the data and it's terrifying. What I'd like to propose is that SEL can be embedded within literacy. It can be embedded within literature. And just a few examples could be thematic book clubs where 5 or 6 students are reading the same book and then they can get together and talk. And it can help with empathy building. They can connect not only with the characters, but they can connect with each other. Another possibility is that students, when they're reading, sometimes put themselves in that situation and role play so that if they do encounter a situation, for example, bullying, they've kind of prepped themselves for what they're going to say and how they're going to react. And then finally, reading itself can be self-care for some students. They just like to melt into a book, take a few minutes, turn off all the electronics and technology, and really just focus on reading and their own well-being. And then finally, a huge need is social support. These 2 years of different learning environment have had long-term impacts. Some students just feel anxiety, even just being in a classroom. And so often they might be really quiet. They might not want to participate because they really need that extra support. And so something as simple as having roles that the student needs to play in a group conversation, saying, okay, you're going to be partner A, you're going to be partner B, or you're going to be the person that's reporting and you're going to be the person that's asking the questions. It might seem simplistic, but it can go a long way if students are anxious or hesitant to get involved in conversations. So next, we're going to talk just a little bit about what we've done recently within our own county, and that's Madera County, to try to support literacy within our own county. So the first thing is just-in-time professional learning. We tried to design professional learning based on what teachers needed. So for example, the first year of the pandemic, We got our hands on the distance learning playbook as soon as it was released and developed a training so that teachers can be prepared because they just had, no one had ever really done this before. And so they needed that support. Another example is we had a site request ELD instruction and professional learning. And so we found the latest publication, Improving Results for Multilingual Learners, and provided training based on just one of the chapters within that resource. A second really exciting grant opportunity that we've been involved in is the CLSD grant that Tulare County Office of Education developed. And so we were really honored to partner up with them, and that's called Readership. And so the focus of Readership is bringing those culturally relevant books into the classroom, providing support for teachers. We've had digital discussions where authors come and meet in a Zoom meeting with teachers and share about their books. And then we purchase those books and give them to the teachers, and then they can do things like book clubs with their students. And then finally, another aspect of Readership is collaborating with community partners. And so we've been able to purchase books and then distribute them throughout our community to places like a women's shelter and a children's hospital, just for a couple examples, so that we can bring books that are culturally relevant out into our community. A third aspect of our implementation in the last 2 years has to do with county support. So we've noticed a lot of students are reading below grade level, especially at the high school level. And so we've tried to get training and then offer that support to students. I mentioned the reading assessment. That's just one layer of the support we've tried to provide. And then finally, we have something called CSLA coaching. And those are networks where coaches are teamed up with coachees, and they can meet and work with teacher leaders, administrators, and support them. And then finally, I mentioned a little bit with Readership, but we have really focused on community partnerships. How can we leverage those services and bring and connect those services to students and to families? Because we do have a high level need within our county and within our communities. And so we are trying to bridge those gaps where they exist so that students and families receive the support that they are direly in need of. And so I want to end just with a little bit about the positives, the hope for the future. And so really our hope for the future is in our students. A couple things about our students, and I'm speaking specifically about our Central Valley students, but I know that much of what I'm saying really applies to the students across the state of California. So our Madera County students, they are resilient in the face of obstacles. And so sometimes it's not easy to see because maybe they're struggling in school, but students are involved. They're involved in sports, activities, clubs, they volunteer, they help their families, many have jobs. We've heard so many successes, lots of students, they're the first in their family to go to college. They are experiencing levels of success that they never dreamed imaginable. And many of them talk about how a teacher or a coach or a counselor is the person that helped inspire them and make them believe in themselves. Our students are culturally and linguistically diverse. They love to incorporate their own identities into the classroom. And so that's really a wonderful thing about our community and about our county. Our students are technologically driven. I like to always say that if a teacher is struggling with technology, before they call IT, they should ask their students, because there's a good chance that their students will have a solution. And so another thing I always think about is either a teacher is going to compete or they're going to incorporate. And if they're trying to compete with technology, they're going to lose. And so finding ways to incorporate technology are really beneficial because students are really driven by technology. And then finally, our students are passionate. Now, they might not be passionate about the teacher's subject, but they're passionate about something. And so anytime a teacher can incorporate and harness that interest into their subject area, that's a great opportunity for learning to happen. And then finally, students want to be a part of the solution. They know that there is a lot of negativity out there. They experience it. For some of them, it's very personal, and yet they have ideas. They have a voice. And so, anytime students can be brought in and become a part of the solution, it's a fantastic opportunity. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jyothi. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. And I wanted to mention that Danielle is the ELA/ELD Program Director for the Madera County Superintendent of Schools. And thank you for that presentation. You know, I don't know if you know, but I was in the Central Valley. I was at Fresno State for 8 years. And I know those kids you're talking about and how much passion they bring, Madera, Fresno, all of those children. There are so many outside circumstances that impact their learning, and yet they are resilient, as you said, Danielle. So I love that you got a grant to do this work. Are there ways that you feel that you can sustain, and for those counties that don't have that kind of support, are there other ways to sustain bringing in those culturally relevant materials and supporting teachers and using them?
I think the first step is being aware of the need and then prioritizing. And so when you're going to purchase new books, keep in mind, the need for those culturally relevant texts. And so intentionally prioritize those sorts of books. And then also just make training and professional development an important part of that. Not only do we need the books, but we need the books in the students' hands. And so the teachers need to be aware of the books, and they need to read them themselves, and they need to find ways to encourage students. I know, students really look up to their teachers. And so if a teacher says, I just read this book and it's really cool, and I think you'd like it, that can go a long way in developing that love for literature, because a lot of kids just aren't aware of what's out there. They just know that what they've traditionally read, they don't connect to. And so it doesn't, money is great, but it really can just be about prioritization, awareness, and ongoing support.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Danielle? Either the panelists or those who are attending? This is time to ask.
I have a question, Jyothi.
Sure, Tanya. Tanya, sorry, I didn't introduce you.
That's okay.
Tanya is my co-director for the Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing, and she works with the Faculty Council. Go ahead, Tanya.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much, Danielle. It was great. It was really informative. I have a question for you. One of the, if you could talk a little bit more about, you said pre-pandemic, one of the needs that you identified was around taking assets-based approaches to instruction. So can you talk a little bit more about, how do you work with teachers around taking an assets-based approach specifically to literacy?
That's a great question, Tanya. Thank you so much. I think it's also about perspective and attitude. So much of the time, the focus is on what's wrong with students. And there are needs. And so those needs, should be addressed. We should also focus on what's right with students. So even if a student is reading significantly below grade level, they've got interests, they've got skills, they've got abilities. And so the teacher can often harness those and really emphasize those. The other element is, students have a cultural wealth that they bring with them. Can that be leveraged in order to get their interest, make them excited, make them believe in themselves, so that as they increase their reading skills, they don't focus on what's wrong, but on what's right. I hope it makes sense. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Danielle. We're now going to move to our next panelist, Lucy Edwards, who is the Director of Continuous Improvement and Academic Support at Napa County Office of Education.
Thanks, Jyothi. I'm so glad that Danielle kicked us off this morning, because much of what she said, or all of what she said, that's happening for students in Madera County, it can be echoed across all of the counties in California. So I've been asked to share what's happening in Napa County in terms of our literacy support, literacy context. So I want us to think about this being a yes and. So building off of what Danielle just shared, yes, yes, yes. And I'm going to share a little bit more of what's happening in Napa County directly with some of our partners in other parts of the states as well. So thank you so much, Danielle, for kicking us off. And thank you, Jyothi, for inviting us all here today. So I'm going to toggle over, share my screen, and click on the slideshow. So Napa County is an interesting county. We're on the smaller side. So here are some demographics for us. We have 5 school districts and then our own court and community program at the county office. We're a little over 19,000 students and we're in severe declining enrollment. Our largest school district, which is pretty kind of like a medium-sized district as far as California goes, has lost around 2,000 students in the last 5 years. And then our next biggest district is St. Helena Unified over here on the left-hand side with around 1,100 students. And then we go down to some of our small districts with only around 57 students. Howe Mountain at 101 and Pope Valley, which are over here on the right-hand side, are considered kind of small rural districts that are situated in the eastern hills of our county. With that being said, even though we're a smaller county, we are not that much different in demographics than what California shows overall. So over here on the left-hand side, we have our percentages for Napa County in the orange, and then California kind of in the Napa County in yellow, and California kind of in that burnt orange. We're just a few percentage points off from students who are Hispanic, few percentage points off from students who are white, a little bit more difference there with Filipino students and African American students. We do have over 50% of our students are low socioeconomic status. 24% are English learners, and we're pretty much even with the state. 13% of our students identify with disabilities. So I wanted to show you some literacy data or ELA data. This is pre-pandemic data, so it'll be really interesting to see what the CAS scores are like this year as we are moving from pandemic to an endemic. But the vertical bars are Napa County, and then the horizontal bars across the top there are the state average with the respective demographic groups. You'll see our RFEPs in Napa County do quite well after they have been redesignated. Then we have all students. This is again ELA CAS results from 2018-19. You'll know that 1920 we didn't have CAS, and in 2021 only 2 of our districts took the CAS. So I really didn't feel that that was a fair comparison or fair kind of data to start with. But you'll see where our all students are, and where our students with disabilities are, and where our English learners fall in relation to the state average for those student groups. So we have some work to do with some of our student groups. I wanted to pull out secondary students. So the last slide was all students across Napa County. Secondary students, just 6th, 7th, 8th, and then 11th grade on CASP. Again, for 2018-19. You'll see again Napa County results in relation to the state results. So we definitely have some work to do with students with disabilities and English learners, but we're also, below the state average with our other student groups too. I want to show you what the data looks like over time. So our students with disabilities and our English learners are significantly underperform all students in California and Napa County including the RFEPs, which are there in the blue line on ELA CAS. So this is going back all the way to 2014-15 up until 2018-19. I just wanted to show you kind of how our students are doing in Napa County over time. So, Napa County, all students and our RFEPs, are pretty much kind of neck and neck with the state there. But our students with disabilities and English learners, we have some work to do in that area. So this is where our work comes in from the Napa County Office of Ed. And we were fortunate to apply for and be awarded one of the 7 state comprehensive literacy grants. And so our literacy grant is called Lead to Literacy. And we are also partnering with Riverside County Office of Education down south, and then Siskiyou County Office of Education up north. I'm not going to spend too much time on those other county offices, but I do want to point out that some of our districts are also involved in this, and this is a great way for us to kind of get in and see what their systems are all about and how we can support them with secondary students, especially those students with disabilities, to improve literacy outcomes for those students. So our overarching grant goals for students, secondary students, especially those with disabilities, is to build capacity for effective literacy instruction. So we are working with our school districts to build talent, to make sure that they have the strategies around structured literacy that are needed for students who are not reading at the secondary level. Our theory of action goals are to then improve student outcomes with a focus on students with disabilities. We have all of our districts now in Napa County using an interim literacy assessment for their students, whether they are K or TK-12 or whether they are TK 8th grade formats. But we have all of our districts using an interim assessment now, so we can gauge and track progress of literacy development across the year and not have to wait for those CASP scores, which are really lagging. We are also working with our other county offices of ed partners with their school districts who are involved in the grant to make sure that they have also adopted and are using an interim assessment so we can more readily attract that student outcome data. Another overarching grant goal is to reduce disproportionality based on race and ethnicity in special education inclusion, and then also disciplinary actions. So not only do we want this grant work in literacy to change up practices within the systems in which students are nested, but we also want to see student outcomes increase, but we also want to see other measures get better over time. And we're doing this kind of on a pilot scale, so we are learning as we are going and improving, and so we hope to be able to create a model to be able to share with others that is also sustainable over time. So here are some kind of big bucket key activities for this grant work. Again, we're developing pilot programs. We're not going to scale all at once. We want to see what works for different local contexts for secondary students, especially those with disabilities. We're bringing a more disciplined continuous improvement approach not only to this work. So not only are we building capacity around talent development and what strategies to be using in the classroom, but we also want to see if those strategies are actually making a difference. And so in addition to the content around literacy, we will also be bringing a continuous improvement approach with disciplined kind of data collection to see what's working and changing in a positive way for adult behaviors in the system, student behaviors, and then student outcomes. We're building capacity at all levels of the system. We don't want to just stop at changing practices within the classroom. That might work in the short term, but for long-term sustainability, we want to make sure that those effective strategies for literacy development, instruction, and improvement are going to be housed within a system that continuously supports those literacy strategies. So we're supporting systemic changes over time at the district level, at the site level, and at the classroom level. And then we'll also be engaging community, educational partners, and especially families on this journey of ours. Our theory of change aligns really well with Senge's and his partners' 6 conditions of systems change. We also believe, as these authors do, that to have a sustainable improvement with and shifts in systems over time, we need to be intentionally looking at all levels of the system. If we just look at the first level around structural change, which includes policies, practices, and resource flows, we're only going to get at some of the improvement that we're wanting to see. In order to have long-term sustainability, where those strategies and practices live in a really supportive system, we need to dig deeper underneath kind of the surface of what's going on in the culture and the connections and the mental models, and get at the relational change, and also be intentional about transformative change. So within the first year of this work, we have come in at the relational change level. We want to understand how students are experiencing their schooling experience. And so we want to understand what's happening in the context in which they're being educated. So we're taking a deep look, and we're helping our partners take a deep look at the relationships, the connections, the communication flow, and then also the power dynamics of how decisions are made. And so this first year, we are seeing how people are relating to each other, who's doing what and where in the systems around literacy. We're helping them establish district literacy teams or leadership teams around literacy that have already gone through a comprehensive needs assessment to identify what bright spots they can leverage, but then where their growth areas are in their systems that they can target. They have put that needs assessment data and information into the working on creating literacy plans that will house their priorities, will have their vision for literacy, and then be kind of a roadmap for what they want to tackle and improve on in their systems in kind of slightly different ways, just depending on local context over time. So this also touches on power dynamics and kind of who's making the decisions and which educational partners will be allowed to make decisions or get to make decisions in terms of working with literacy. The relationships and the connections also touched on the mental models, and we're getting to know what the beliefs in the system are and what the values are, and then how those values and beliefs are kind of pushing on the behaviors and the interactions in the system. All of that needs to be taken into consideration as districts are building out their literacy plans and their own goals for what they want to accomplish in the next couple of years. But the literacy plans are going to show what practices at the district level, at the site level, and then at the classroom level, they want to see improvement for. They're taking a look at their resources, which ones can be leveraged. Many of our district partners that we are working with don't have literacy coaches. And so this grant is able to fund some literacy coaches for the districts that don't have them. So being able to optimize those literacy coaches that will support both students and teachers in the classroom. And then, of course, we are inviting districts to take a look at their policies. Which ones might, might be overlooked in terms of sustaining literacy improvement across their systems, and which ones might need to be changed up. So where we're headed is hiring and getting coaches in place for our literacy partners. We have also established a professional learning network for our district partners that will come together on a regular basis to share common challenges, to share common successes, to be learning with and from each other as we test out our theory of action, get people trained in specific structured literacy practices, and learn from each other about how the implementation of those literacy practices are going in the classrooms, and what about the system is helping to support those literacy practices and getting them sustained over time. Not only will we have district leadership teams, but we'll have school site leadership teams, again, to be in constant communication or regular communication, at least with the district. So we have those communication loops. We are bringing in outside expertise from UC Riverside and Dr. Solis and his team. And then we've also partnered with Chartwell Teacher Training Institute to, again, build the capacity and talent development of the people in the classrooms and their leaders, to also show how important these strategies are for structured literacy, what happens in the brain when kids are struggling to read, why it's so important to be utilizing and implementing these strategies in the classroom. Not only do teachers and coaches need to understand the importance and the value of said structured literacy practices, but the system support also needs to be there so that it can be sustained over time. Our team are conducting ongoing regular site visits to be in constant communication with folks, and then we'll be also involving community and family as well. So we are really excited about the opportunity that these grants are providing the different county offices and different areas in California. And we can't wait to share in the future what our learning has been and what improvements have been made.
Thank you so much, Lucy. We have a little time for questions and comments. Well, as we wait, I just want to say thank you, Lucy. That was so informative. It looks like really meaningful, exciting work. And I love the idea of starting with the connections and the relationships first, because we all know if you do top-down policy changes, they don't stick. And there's a lot of resistance. So I love that you're doing that.
We're coming at it at the system from all levels, from the bottom up, but also from the top down. Because we know if we just train teachers, that's a very important part of it. But we also have, that has to be nested within a supportive system that understands the importance of sustaining those strategies. So what does that look like, for tier 1 instruction? What structures need to be changed up and improved and strengthened for supported tier 2 instruction and supported tier 3 instruction? And that can't happen without the system support.
Yeah, absolutely. You see how many teachers get frustrated trying to do something and not having the administrative support. So wonderful work. I think we have a question. Tanya, did you want to?
Sure.
The question in the chat
around why English learners. So, and when we applied for the literacy grant, we were only allowed to apply for one priority area. We have in-house talent expertise with students with disabilities. And so that's why we went after priority 7. That doesn't, though, mean that we are not also going to take a look at our English learners, because we do need to provide them with support as well. So we're hoping what we learn with our, secondary students with disabilities, that we can also extrapolate those learnings and then also bring them to the larger community, which would also include English learners. And we have quite a few quite a few students who are dual diagnosed.
Thank you, Lucy. So in interest of time, we're going to move on, but we will have time at the end for further questions. Thank you. And next we have Chris Eddings, who is the ELA-ELD program director for Stanislaus. Chris?
Yes, thank you. I love what Lucy is saying about systemic change. Absolutely, I applaud that for sure. So what I wanted to do was spend a little, let me just share screen here, spend a little bit of time talking about some of the classroom practices that are in need of systemic change. We need to see more of these things in class. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about student engagement. So most of the work that I do is you know, by teacher request and from districts and administrators, and you know, they're saying, you know, so-and-so teachers are really struggling with getting students engaged. You know, the students aren't talking during class. So I thought I would take sort of that classroom approach today and talk about a couple strategies that I've been, or our literacy team has been rolling out to tackle those challenges. So we know that we're still on the, still feeling the effects of the pandemic, and students are having a tough time engaging, communicating and opening up in the classroom. And I would say that's probably been one of the most common responses we get from educators within our county, Stanislaus County. And we know that students learn most when they're engaged with the material, when the curriculum excites them, and when they have something to contribute to the class. Danielle touched on this a little bit, how our literacy canon, and you know, includes the works of Shakespeare and other pieces of literature that students just, they don't have a whole lot of background knowledge on. So it takes a lot to get them going, and it takes a lot to get the conversation started. So these are some of the comments that I'm hearing from teachers. We're showing a decline in reading levels from administrators as well. Students won't talk during class. It's like they've forgotten how to, and then you fill in the blank. I've heard it all. I'm sure you guys have too. It's like they've forgotten how to communicate. It's like they've forgotten how to engage. They've forgotten how to study, how to think. And we know that not all of those things are true. We just need to find out how to get them, how to get that spark going in the classroom. They definitely won't read in class, and definitely won't read at home either, right? I'm sure you guys have all heard those things. But the result of these comments is that teachers, at least in our county and region, are sort of, they're doing all of the heavy lifting now, right? They're doing all of the reading in class because they've just submitted and said, hey, you know, students won't do the reading in class or outside of class, and we still have to work through our curriculum. So we're just going to do a read aloud, and you know, we know that's not the most effective way to improve education. So not all of the information and source of knowledge should come from only the teacher. We need to get the students engaged and you know, leading certain parts of activities. So looking at these images here, right, my literacy teachers are saying, oh yeah, I've taught some of that, some of this, some of that, and it's so hard to get students going in these text selections. Because again, they're not readily accessible or relatable to students, but they're important, right? You know, it uncovers parts of our past and you know, historical happenings that all students should be aware of. So my goal and our literacy team's goal has been to get students interested. They need to see themselves in the content in order to open up and relate to it, even if it's just as a scaffold to lead into these more complex texts that our curriculum has. So effectively, we need a bridge so that students can see themselves in the topics of study to get them interested. It's like starting a siphon, right? How do we get them talking about this content in a way that is going to open their minds and keep their ears open and keep them wanting more? So how do we streamline that process? This is a quote I pulled from California English, which is a publication that came out just this month, actually. If you can integrate popular culture into the curriculum, you can get more engagement from students and also help them make important connections between the classroom and their lives outside of school, right? So this is kind of going back to what I was saying before. We need to generate interest so that students can enter into the larger conversation that results in new learning. And this quote was from Isaac Blum. He's an author. So one strategy that I've been rolling out to different sites is encouraging teachers to explore texts. And I put text in quotation marks because not all text has to be, written word. We can include things like podcasts, short video clips, TED Talks, art, right? We have visual imagery. There's a lot of different ways to get students engaged. But it's important to know that all of these different texts carry value, whether it's the content that's being delivered in the text or it's the style, right? So when we look at our standards, we know that students need to engage in text and respond and cite evidence and persuade. And if they're not doing it with the core curriculum, then let's switch it up a little bit. Let's get creative and have them, draft an argument around whether or not Spider-Man is really an asset to the city, right? And of course he is. We all know he is. But that's something that would, get students going and get them engaged, and something that they're already confident about, right? They know about these things. Language does not become a barrier to get students engaged and going on these topics. So when I'm working with teachers, I encourage them to explore these different texts and to keep them fairly short. It should be attainable. Visual text removes language barriers, so that it's a nice scaffold as we move into more complex text. But when searching, connect to the concepts, themes, and topics from your core curriculum in order to set that hook, right? Which is a challenge right now, is getting students hooked in, getting them interested, getting them talking about the content. And it's important that when teachers are doing these things, that they structure speaking and writing activities in ways that are routinely practiced, right? So like one routine that I love is the reciprocal teaching routine, where you've got a group of 4 students and each student has a role. And as they're reading, they're in charge of their part of that activity. And so that creates accountability, they're engaged. But it's important not to set really rigid parameters, right? Especially at the beginning when we're trying to hook them in and get them engaged. We want them to sort of just openly, genuinely engage with the content. So it is a balance. It's a balance. But to kind of touch on the need for routine practices in order for students to open up, we don't want them to feel the constant pressure of something new every day, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to talk in front of the class. I've never done this before. And it's really hard to get the most out of that student when they've never practiced it. So I encourage, choose a handful of engagement strategies and stick with them, right? Students, they like that familiarity. They want to know what to expect when they go in class. It's kind of like if you've been on if you're a roller coaster fan, let's take Space Mountain, for example, at Disneyland. The first time you ride it, you're probably holding on to the bar, right? Because you're like, oh, I don't know what to expect. This is kind of crazy. I'm going to hold on. But after you've ridden it a couple times, now you're throwing your hands up in the air and you're whipping through and screaming and laughing, right? Because you know what to expect now. You can open up and truly engage and enjoy what you're doing. So increase the frequency of responses in lessons. So once students are on the hook, right, we've got this popular culture infused into our curriculum now. You've explored and you've found a few images that might spark interest, maybe a short YouTube video. They're on the hook now. Now let's get them responding to text. And often I recently attended a talk from Dr. Anita Archer, and it's called Learning is Not a Spectator Sport. And I encourage you guys to search that up. Anita Archer is fantastic. But she has a few different bits of information that I would like to share. Increasing the frequency of responses increases time on task, decreases disruptions, and in her opinion, and I would agree with this, 70% of responses should be all call, like all say responses, right? And then that way everyone's participating frequently throughout the day. And then 30% should be individual non-volunteer responses. Notice that we don't have volunteer, right? We've already hit 100%. And the idea here is that students, in order to build equity in the classroom, students should not be raising their hands. Those with classroom experience know that you get your top 5, that are constantly raising their hands, and they're eager to respond, and that sort of discourages other students from responding. We don't want to silence those eager students, of course. So following this model kind of is the best of both worlds. And just to share a little bit about how often students should be responding in order to support engagement. Simple responses, such as a unison response, a gesture, a response card, things of that nature, 3 to 5 per minute, right? Which is pretty eye-opening. A complex response, such as a partner share or a short written answer, maybe a math problem, 1 every minute. And then a very complex response, such as a writing prompt or an experiment of sorts, 1 every 10 to 30 minutes, right? So that really touches back on what I was saying before. The teacher shouldn't be the only source of knowledge in the classroom. The teacher should be facilitating, and students need to take more accountability. And when they do, they're way more engaged, and they feel like they have something to offer the class, which is a good feeling. So responses should include saying, writing, and or doing. Her mantra is everyone does everything. So if you do have roles, they need to be rotating roles, frequent verbal responding, checks for understanding, paired work, sharing your partner's responses, all things to keep students engaged and alert. A couple strategies that I really like, I used when I was in the classroom, and I encourage teachers to use right now in order to utilize that scaffold of getting students speaking first, right? So language is not a barrier. And then to get them writing, the first one would be the answer or echo strategy. I know in my classroom, I would call on a student and they would just say something like, I don't know. And then it's like, that's the end of the conversation. It's hard, sometimes it's hard to probe. So I set a protocol in my class. It's called answer or echo, where the student can provide an original answer, or if they're not ready for that, then they can paraphrase what a different student said previously, which is beneficial. It ensures a response, and they're having to condense information and paraphrase it in a way that's sort of slightly unique, even if it's not their own original idea. Another great strategy to get students talking is called Save the Last Word, where you have groups of students, groups of 3. All students prepare for a question individually. So you might do your own reading and annotating, but you're going to anticipate entering into a group conversation. And once you're in your group of 3, student A will share their response to a question, or just like, what did you feel was most important in this excerpt of text? But they don't elaborate. They just say, I thought this line was most important to show the characterization of, whatever the case might be. Students B and C comment on student A's response, right? So now they're adding additional information, they're building. And then it's called Save the Last Word, because the last student, student A, it comes back to that student for the last word. And then student A responds and comments to students B and C. And they also offer some elaboration of why they why they chose the response that they did. So it's a really cool strategy. And then you repeat the process. So now student B will start and A and C will comment. I thought I would just throw a couple strategies in here. And then getting students to expand on their responses. We do a lot of work around with English learners, and we're always trying to find ways to enrich their language and their speaking and writing. And one simple way comes from the Writing Revolution, fantastic book. Highly encourage you guys to pick a copy of that if you haven't already. But this strategy it's so simple and universal, right? You have a start, you have a stem, right? Something like the dogs ate quickly. And then you encourage students to add because, but, and so, or it can be when, where, and why. And so they're expanding on that sentence now, right? The dogs ate quickly because they were starving, but there was limited food, so they snapped at each other. And then you would work with students to expand that sentence in a cohesive way. Since there was limited food, the starving dogs ate quickly and snapped at each other, right? So we're expanding sentences, some explicit language work here. Okay. Now, one strategy, classroom strategy that sort of builds all of this in together, and engagement and listening and speaking and writing, is quad text sets. And a quad text set, achievethecore.org has done a great job of compiling information and even putting together some quad text sets that are pre-made for teachers. So to back up a bit, a quad text set, it's a collection of texts and media resources, right? We talked about engaging students earlier with things like video and art and imagery and photos. So it's a collection of text and media resources that are tightly focused on a specific topic to build background knowledge and vocabulary, right? So before we jump into Animal Farm, how can we piece together some texts or some resources that are going to give students a bit of background information before they're expected to start reading that text? So it's a fantastic strategy. It's very engaging. It takes a bit of footwork to get it going, especially if it's your first couple or you're making it for the first time. But I encourage teachers all the time to give this a shot. Given our current climate, we need to do something different to get students engaged. There are a lot of pre-made text sets out there. Newsella is offering them. ReadWorks, Achieve the Core, Common Lit, Facing History and Ourselves, and Teaching Tolerance. They all offer some pre-made text sets that you can search and filter by grade level and all that good stuff. So very cool. And then you have options for administration of these text sets. You can have all students go through each text in a set, or you can let students choose which text they want to engage in. So kind of exploring some student choice and voice, right? Giving them some say in what they're going to learn. But the idea is that you would start with, not a difficult text. You might even start with a video or an image, and you work your way into the target text, which is your complex, Animal Farm, for example, in a kind of a scaffolded approach. I won't go through this in great detail, but when you're building a text set, you want to select a topic, right? So if my topic is going to be the space race, and we're going to read an informational article from my curriculum, you need to first determine what are the knowledge demands, what might trip students up, right? So they might need knowledge of competition, of the Cold War, give them some context, and then some vocabulary that might trip them up would be something like espionage or aeronautics. So how do we build their background knowledge before we expect them to jump in and engage in this this article on the space race? So you build your text set, finding text that builds vocabulary and background knowledge. Again, you want to appeal to student interest in popular culture, which is kind of the main takeaway today. And then determine the order. right? Easy to digest, and then you move into more difficult texts as you go. It is important that as you're creating a text set, that you want to assign some lightweight text-dependent tasks for each text. And here's just a list of ideas, whether it's a 10-word summary or, you know, the save the last word strategy that we talked about, a vocabulary log, but they are effectively building background knowledge in order to enter into the greater conversation of the anchor text that will come with the anchor text. So to wrap up, an example might look something like this. If we're sticking with the topic of the space race and I'm building a text set, I might start with a YouTube clip of Elon Musk's recent TED Talk, which is awesome, by the way. You should give it a watch. And then I might move into a short factual text, an article on the Cold War and espionage to build some capacity there before jumping into our core text, our target text rather. So anyway, I just thought I would share a few strategies that I have found effective in the classroom based on some of the current challenges that we're seeing around literacy right now. And I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We have a question if we can get a copy of your PowerPoint. And yes, Anna, we will be providing all of those in a folder to access later. And it just goes to show, like Chris, I know it's strategies, but often it comes down to those everyday classroom activities and what are we actually doing and how are we providing scaffolding for students and for teachers. We're kind of short on time and we may visit this again at the end. Kelly is asking about the title for the writing text, but we will have those for you. And then at the end, we can talk about this more, but I just wanted to ask you, do you find resistance when you're working with administrators and teachers on, you know, we saw the comments at the beginning where they're like, oh, this is hard and they're not listening and nothing's happening. Do you feel that there is an openness to the strategies that you're offering, or is there more resistance at this point?
I've gotten a little bit of both. They are a bit time consuming to create, and oftentimes teachers will say, well, we have to stick to our pacing guide, you know, that we have to stick to our core text. And that there's truth to that. So it just takes practice, and I encourage new teachers to be culturally and socially responsive when they're doing their lesson planning and keeping some of that autonomy going, right? Because you're the one in front of the classroom and we need to hook students in. Yeah, and then from administrators, to just make sure that they hit their curriculum as well. So, and it's an effective strategy to incorporate the best of both worlds.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And then we are now going to our last but not least, Leslie Zoroya, who is the project director for Reading and Language Arts at the LA County Office of Ed.
Yes,
Leslie?
hello. Thanks so much for having me. And I've just been listening to everyone else's presentations here, and I'm going to do the answer and echo strategy that Chris shared and say that I would echo what you have all said so far. And I think that my take on it here is a good synopsis of what everyone has said. So maybe it was right that we put me last. So let me share my screen here and we'll take a look at just a few things from LA County. So I am the project director for Reading and Language Arts here at LA County Office of Ed. And we are quite a large county. We have 81 school districts and more than 1.4 million students that we serve. So it is quite a lot of students. And I'm going to start with just a little bit of data. I'd have you look at so the top row is 3rd and 5th grade from 2018-19 and 2021. It's not exactly great in terms of VLA proficiency, as you can see, and it's similar to what others have shared today. And the second row, drilling down to scores for English learner, it's really quite abysmal. this is fairly consistent across the state. We're not adequately serving our students of color and our English learners particularly well if you take a look at what we see here. I don't know if any of you saw this recent article from Reading Rockets. It's an article from Margaret Goldberg from the Right to Read Project. And she profiles the students of LOT versus the state of California lawsuit and talks about how these issues that happened within this particular lawsuit are prevalent across the state. So if you haven't read that, I would highly suggest that you check that out because it's a really good synopsis of what's going on across the state. And then EdSource also recently published this article showing that California has the lowest literacy rate of any state, which was sort of depressing and sad. And so that is not super encouraging. However, it's been this sort of educational skeleton that we've all been walking around with for a while. And it's come to light more recently, especially with Emily Hanford's work. I know many of you are familiar with her work in terms of reading. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is I want to focus on K-5 literacy first. What are some of the issues that we're seeing specifically in grades K through 5? So if we look at that, first of all, we see, similar to what Danielle said, phonemic awareness deficits for sure. We know that if 70 to 80% of our students are struggling readers because of phonological deficits, then that is something that we really need to be attending to. Other things we've been seeing in LA County, sound symbol correspondence has been shaky, kids are having trouble segmenting and blending, there's lots of spelling errors, they have trouble reading fluently and with prosody, which of course makes their comprehension impaired. And then we also know that that creates dependent learners who have trouble reading on their own and exhibit behaviors like guessing strategies and keeping their eyes off of the text and inventing the story instead of actually looking at what the story is saying to them. So those are some of the behaviors we're noticing in LA County for K through 5. And then if we look at 6 through 12, similar to what Chris was talking about, we have students who don't like to read. And that's likely because they struggle. They have poor reading comprehension. Many students also struggle with insufficient academic English skills, and it often will show up in their writing. We see informal register. Kids with reading deficiencies heavily rely on scaffolds to complete their tasks and also present as dependent learners. So what are we actually doing about that? That's the bigger question, I think. I think we can all agree on what some of the issues are. But let's talk a little bit about what are we doing about these. Well, we were also in LA County recently awarded a $5 million California Literacy State Development Grant to address these issues, especially in our case for effective Tier 1 literacy instruction in grades K through 5. So that's a big project that we're working on. And we won that grant with a program that we developed 2 years ago called Getting Reading Right. And it's designed to support teachers with learning about the vast body of research on how the brain learns to read and how to explicitly and systematically teach reading skills. And in our grant, we work with the Lancaster School District here in LA County up in the high desert. And we have 3 pilot schools that you see here. And then we also have 3 other cohorts of this work going on across the county. So what is our Getting Reading Right program? It has 3 main goals. The first is to build teacher knowledge in the science of reading. Teachers are currently ill-equipped to teach reading. Many do not have a clear understanding of how the brain learns to read. They teach reading by following the teacher's guide in a curriculum that is likely not systematic or explicit. And California's had a largely balanced literacy approach and has lacked some robust early foundational reading skills. So we found that teachers often don't know what they don't know, and when they finish our 10-month Getting Reading Right program, they constantly tell us, how is it that I didn't know this? How is it that no one has taught me this before? So our goal is to ensure that they have the background to make good instructional decisions with whatever their curriculum is. Our program is not curriculum specific. It's more about building teacher knowledge. And then our second goal is to change teacher practice. So we really want to make sure that teachers have both the research and the strategies to do something. So we focus on teaching them to use quality universal screeners and diagnostics so they can inform their instruction and do targeted lessons in small groups. We show them what systematic and explicit instruction looks like and help them to analyze their current curriculum and supplement where they need to supplement. And we also look at students who are not making progress and provide strategies for addressing specific needs. And then our final goal here is to vet resources for them. So we also took some time to take a look at all of the free and readily available resources that teachers can use so that they have tools when they're needed. So what do we do in this program? It's basically 10 months. We meet with them once a month for 90 minutes on Zoom. Teachers rate their knowledge of the skill that we're covering that month, and we deliver new content, both the research and the key practices, and we give time for reflection and discussion and breakouts. And then we provide video models and resources so that they can go and implement. And their homework is to embed that new skill into their daily instruction. So this is not just a sit and get, we ask them to actually take it and go and do. So our trainings are based on two frameworks. The first one is Scarborough's reading rope. So each month we do a drill down on one of the elements of the rope, beginning with the word recognition side of the rope. And these skills are the finite skills. These are the skills that we really can, as educators, teach to mastery. And there's no reason not to ensure that every single student who leaves our care can't master these 26 letters and 44 sounds and how they work together in the word recognition side of the rope. And then we also go through the red side of the rope, talking about things like what Chris was talking about with wide reading and text sets and how language works and genres and all of those great things. So it is both and. Yes, everything that everyone has talked about and doing these very specific skills from the word recognition side of the rope. The other framework that we use with teachers is the simple view of reading. So I don't know if we're familiar with that, but the simple view, we like the way that it presents it because it's presented as a math problem. So the first problem is if you take those two sides of Scarborough's reading rope and any child has missing skills in the word recognition side of the rope, but they have a lot of language development, so like a typical kindergartner who maybe has a lot of language but they can't read yet, that would be their profile, but still they wouldn't be a proficient reader. And same with, let's say you have really good decoding skills but you don't have a lot of language experiences and vocabulary development, then that's probably more of like an English learner profile. So they would still have trouble with comprehension because they need both of those things in order to be proficient readers. And then if you're a student, like we have many of in California, who struggle in both areas, and a lot of these are hidden, we don't always know what their skill deficit is if we're not particularly checking for it. And then we end up with students who really struggle, and it's something that rarely gets filled. Those gaps rarely get filled once they get into middle and high school. So the best possible outcome would be for us to make sure that kids are strong in both areas of the reading rope so that we have every kid leaving us as a skilled reader. So that's what we're working on. Here's some photos of some things that we've been doing in our schools, our pilot schools. So lots of targeted small group instruction, multimodal strategies, manipulatives, phonemic awareness work. You'll see lots of blending and segmenting. And we're really excited to see these schools implementing these strategies. They're starting to see real gains in reading achievement. And we're purchasing new curriculum for them, Haggerty and SIPS, which they've already received and they've started working on. So that we're really excited for the next year of the grant because it's going to give us a lot more information and we're going to see these reading scores really skyrocket. So another place that we're hitting is more in terms of what everyone else was talking about in terms of strategy. So we're also hitting the secondary level. We know that a lot of secondary kids, like Chris was talking about, have issues, and secondary teachers have not necessarily been trained on what to do to help them. So we developed a 6-12 strand of getting reading right, and so basically it's similar. They're going to be looking at the science of reading and how it pertains to the secondary classroom. How does this work with middle and high schoolers? So we give them tools for assessing an older student. How do you figure out what the skill gap is? And then we give them strategies and best practices, some of which you saw today through Chris's presentation. Lots of wide reading and lots of very specific strategies that are to also fill in actual gaps, like phonemic awareness gaps and gaps on that word recognition side that most secondary teachers don't know how to do. So we do that as well. And then we always like to say, this is sort of our mantra, you can't graphic organize your way out of reading problems, so let's stop using compensatory strategies and start reading proficiently. In secondary, we're pretty big on scaffolds. You'll hear the term scaffold everywhere. And so we do a lot of scaffolds with kids, but scaffolds don't fix the problem. Scaffolds help them get through the work that they're assigned to do. So what we're really trying to do in our teacher trainings is to help teachers fill those gaps so that they don't have to have as many scaffolds, so that by the time they get to college, they're able to work independently. And then just a couple other initiatives that we have going on. So our Getting Reading Right program that we won the grant for is going statewide. We are turning this program over to other county offices to be able to train. We're very excited about that. A lot of county offices have indicated interest in having this material to train their folks as well, so we're really excited to get that going. We also this year started the LA County Administrators Reading Collaborative, so this goes at what Lucy was saying about systems work. So we know that this work cannot all be done through the heavy lifting, as Chris mentioned, of teachers. This has to be a systemic change, and so we're talking with administrators about how do you support this work? How do you build it? How do you monitor it? How do you sustain it? We know that systems matter. And so we are taking that collaborative group statewide as well. That begins in September, and so we'll be opening that up to any principal or assistant principal in the state that would like to learn more about how to have an effective Tier 1 literacy program. And then we're also excited about a structured literacy coaching academy that we're beginning in October. So a lot of folks are interested in doing the structured literacy work, and they need help with their coaches. How do we coach it? How do we support our teachers who are doing this work so that that heavy lifting that they do is not in isolation all by themselves? And then finally here, and our podcast. Yes, I have to mention our podcast. So we have a podcast called Leading Literacy, and I would highly recommend that if you're interested in this topic, that you listen to the episode with Bonita Unified's Chris Ann Horsley. Bonita Unified is #1 on the California Reading Report Card in the state. And if you don't know about that, listen to the episode with Todd Collins, because he's the founder of the California Reading Coalition, and he's the one who created the California Reading Report Card. And Bonita Unified is #1 on that list. And so we interviewed Chris Ann to find out how they did it. And so that episode is fantastic. Please listen to it if you get a chance, because it's a really good concrete example of how a district has actually done this work. All right, so one of the questions that was posed to us when we were asked to be on this panel was, if you were queen of the world, they may not have said it this way, but this is how I interpret it. If you were queen of the world, what would you make sure that teachers coming into the profession would be able to do? What would they know? What would we prepare them to do? So here's my response to that. I would say that teachers would be steeped in reading research. They would really understand how the brain learns to read. Lucy mentioned that, and Danielle mentioned that. So that research is really important for them to know. Also understanding how to deliver explicit and systematic instruction. They need to know how to do it in a way that is not just open your book and start at page 1 and read through the teacher's guide to page 112. They need to be smart. We always say we need teachers who are smarter than their curriculum, who know more about how the brain learns to read, so they can address every single issue that gets thrown their way as students come to them with all kinds of interesting and varying needs. We'd also like them to know what to do with quality reading assessments, how to use them to form small groups so that they can target instruction and really drill into the specific needs of their students. And they would be rock stars at that small group instruction. They would be able to deliver that and just know what to do and make it really effective so that those groups can be flexible and you don't have to be in the Bluebirds or the Buzzards group forever, that those groups switch based on the need that you have. And then I would also add that they would do wide reading, that they would really care about diverse perspectives, bringing in diverse texts, really attend to the cultural needs, attend to broadening the horizons of their students through that as well. And then, like we said before, teaching word recognition skills to mastery and really just delivering effective Tier 1 reading instruction. So if I was in charge, that's what I would do. So I'll just close with that. I think it's a good summary of kind of what we're dealing with and why we're all here and why we all care about this issue. I think everyone that's sitting here and that came today really cares about making sure that in California, all of our students learn to read and are literate and enjoy reading and enjoy being part of a literate society. So I think we all have the same goal.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That was powerful indeed. And it's really exciting to see all of the things that LA County is doing and that you're going to go statewide with some of these initiatives. The administrator one especially, I thought that's something that's so needed, administrator support and coaching. So thank you. We are fast approaching our time limit and I don't want to keep anyone if there are other things to do, but in the few minutes left, we thought maybe we could ask one question. We don't have time for a big panel discussion, which I would have loved to have, but we've learned so much already. So is Tanya or anyone attending, does anyone have a question that they would like of the panelists?
I could ask another question. I don't want to take the time from someone who has another one, but so I feel like, so Lucy, you particularly talked about, and then Christopher as well, just about the importance of systemic, right? Making systemic change. And Lucy, you particularly mentioned continuous improvement. And as someone who's been involved in a lot of that work, I know it's power, but I also know it's challenge, especially when you're partnering with others to have that work happen, right? Like, you know, I'm coming from a higher education background and we partnered with districts. And so, you know, having people in on those data meetings that you have and like, you know, making decisions and getting people in the room together, like you're talking about how it can't just be the coaches and the teachers, it has to be the, you know, head of curriculum for the district, you know, like that person ultimately is the person who makes a lot of these bigger decisions. And if they're not in on some of these smaller, do you kind of get what I'm talking about? And so like, you know, we found that a big part of when we would report on our grant and they say, well, what did you do? And I'd say, well, it took like a month to get a meeting with everybody, you know, just all the right people in the right room. And we would push back when they'd say, well, is that really progress? You know, and I'm like, it took us a month to do, you know, so I don't know, what are your thoughts about that and how that's working for you all in terms of getting everybody that needs to be there in order to really make that systemic change?
It's a challenge. I mean, there's always this sense of urgency. And so there's this tension between, we've got to do something now. We needed to do something yesterday, but then to get people, the right people in the same room all at once, whether it's, you know, a virtual or a physical room, that does take time. So there's always this kind of push-pull against the urgency and then the reality of the context in which we're working. So we're in this for the long game. Yeah. So what can we go after now? What are those small changes that we can make to start seeing improvements? And then how can we, you know, shifting systems isn't going to happen overnight. And so we have to keep the momentum going so that we can see those incremental changes over time system-wide. I'm not sure if I'm getting at the right answer for your question, but you kind of also have to honor where systems are too. So you can't just go in and change up a system point blank. You have to work within the system, massage it to be able to make those shifts over time. So patience, I think, is required, but then also never losing sight. Leslie captured it beautifully, like we've got to do something now for kids. And so that's kind of the balance that we're striving for with our literacy work.
Thank you, Lucy. And I'm going to end, since we're running out of time, with one other question from a different perspective. So we're talking county and administrator, but I know that you really want that collaboration with literacy faculty across the CSU and how we are preparing teachers. So my question to any of you and all of you is, what do you feel, and I know some of you have touched on this already, but what do you want us as literacy faculty to do better with our teacher preparation programs? How can we help in this process? And anyone is free to jump in.
I would say teach them about structured literacy, teach them about the science of reading, teach them about how kids learn to read, and provide them with the tools they need to do this work. So many of our teachers are telling us, not only did I not get this research, which has been available for 30 years, I never saw it, I never knew about it, but I don't have the right tools. I don't know all of the tools in order to enact it in the classroom. And so I would say if I was in charge of teacher ed right now, those are and at the high school level as well, exactly. All teachers need to understand how kids learn to read. We have kids who struggle at every grade level. There is no magic third grade fix. There is no magic third grade fix. Kids do not automatically learn to read at third grade because they're in third grade. And we need reading instruction all the way through to, high school, into high school, so that kids are proficient readers with different kinds of texts and using the strategies that Chris talked about, but also filling in gaps where they need them. So I think that's a huge, huge thing. And if we could get that, we'd be in a much better place.
Most definitely. I echo that, what Leslie says, and across the content areas too.
Yes.
It's not just in language arts.
Even in our content literacy classes, that's
Yes.
something we should be focusing on. Thank you for that. Any other comments from our panelists?
Just to echo that, I experienced it myself when I was teaching as a secondary teacher. My teacher prep program, there was no information about the science of reading. So just to kind of echo the thought behind, providing that information to secondary teachers is vitally important.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone. We're so grateful for the perspectives that have been shared by all of you and around the work of bettering K-12 literacy instruction for our children across the state of California. I think this webinar demonstrates that there's still a lot more that we need to talk about, that they're very important conversations we need to have regarding the role of teacher preparation in the scope of literacy instruction across California as well. And we really look forward to problem solving with our partners. And we would like to share some of the wonderful work that's already being done across the CSU system. So thanks again to all of you for attending, for presenting, and we look forward to more conversations. Thanks again.